Hey guys, it's currently my review for the new Netflix miniseries, Maniac. And what Maniac is essentially about is we center on these two characters, Owen and Annie. They are both highly unstable people who are both going through various situations in their life, and when they are given the chance to basically be one of the test subjects for this drug treatment that is going on, they immediately sign up, which basically it's this drug that supposedly is going to take all of their problems away and is finally going to be able to help them deal with these long-running situations in their life. But as they begin to enter this test, they start to realize that there is way more going on here than they initially signed up for, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Maniac overall, I was honestly really hyped for this series. I mean, just the fact you had Jonah Hill and Emma Stone in general in a series together, you know, I really loved what we saw of them in Superbad. I thought their chemistry was very strong there, and I was really excited to see what they were going to do in the show, but also this was a show that I did not really know how it was going to be. You know, despite the fact that there were trailers, Netflix was pretty tight-lipped about what this show was actually going to entail and how this show was actually going to play out, and I really did not know what was going to happen here. The plot in general really did intrigue me, and I have to say, Maniac really did not disappoint at all. This is a very highly unconventional show, but definitely I think is one of the most ambitious shows that Netflix has done in a very long time. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I'll just say right now, everyone's phenomenal here. Everyone really does do an exceptional job in this show. There really isn't one performance here that I can say, oh, they're miscasted, oh, they're not as strong. Let's first talk about Jonah Hill, because I'm sure that's immediately one of the things that are going to sign people up. And yeah, he is really great in this role. What I really love about the character of Owen is that he's someone that always kind of feels like an outsider. He's very much like the black sheep of his family, and he's kind of trying to deal with that. And his best scenes in the show deal with him not really knowing what's the difference between what's real and the difference between what's not, and I really love what he was able to do in the show. He's able to project so much out of that role, especially for someone who's kind of closed off and has difficulty connecting with people, and I think he did a very good job with that. But he also really shines in a lot of the fantasy sequences here. There's a lot of various characters that he does have to play, and he really does shine in a lot of them, particularly one involving this accent that, if anyone else, could have been really annoying and could have really taken me out of the episode, but because of what Hill was able to do with it, it was not only really funny, but it really did show his range as an actor, and I do think he did a really splendid job here. But for me, easily the standout of the series is Emma Stone as the character of Annie, who I adored in this show. I honestly do think this is one of her best performances. It's not La La Land level, like I wouldn't say that, but it still is a phenomenal performance from her. Annie is someone who is dealing with this tragedy in her life, and she, once again, is just not very good with connecting with people. She's very antisocial. She's trying to kind of, you know, mask her guilt with this, you know, with this death by, you know, using all these pills and things like that, and I thought that she was just a very intriguing character. I really love where she ended up going. She, by far, I think, has the most depth out of anyone in this show, and I loved where they end up going with her character here. You know, Stone was so strong in this role, and the chemistry between these two, I think, are really great here. Once again, they have to play a lot of different iterations of their respective characters, and I really did enjoy getting into that. I thought they worked very well together, and I honestly couldn't have seen anyone else casted here. They both were fantastic. But someone else I absolutely have to highlight in the show is Justin Theroux as Dr. James K. Mantelray. This guy appears to be a doctor that from the moment you meet him, there's just something really off about him. He frequently has a lot of outbursts, and he is just as unstable as the two people who are headlining the series. And I really love where Theroux got to go with this character. He's very wacky. He's very out there. He's someone who, a lot of the time, you're not really sure if he should really be running this operation, but that's what makes makes his character, though, that much more intriguing, and I really did love when they ended up going with him in the show. He went in some really surprising directions, and I really loved what he was able to do here. This just further demonstrates how strong of an actor Theroux really is, and I think this was the perfect role for him. I love what he was able to do here. He kind of, you know, when Theroux took this role, he kind of said it was a bit of a palate cleanser from that of Kevin Garvey, and yeah, if you are kind of sick of the dreariness that was Kevin Garvey, this is very much a breath of fresh air. Manta Ray is still, like I said, very damaged, but it's much more, it comes from a much more comedic place, and I definitely really love where they end up going with his character here. He also was so good in this show. And then everyone else also does a great job in this. So Sonoya Mizuno, who is the other doctor that is running this drug testing, I thought she also did a very good job. You could tell that she's very dedicated to her craft, but she also does have a past with Manta Ray's character, and I really loved getting into their overall relationship. Sally Field is so good in this show. She's playing two different characters. She's playing this kind of controlling mother of James, but she's also playing this sort of automated, you know, computer system known as simply as the GRTA or Gerda, and I really loved the way she was able to play both of those characters. She did a really great job. Gabriel Byrne is very good here. Julia Garner kills it as Annie's deceased sister. I thought she was great. Billy Magnussen was great. Gabriel Byrne, I mean, I honestly could go on and on in terms of the talent. Really, everyone, I felt like I said, just really was fantastic here. Everyone was really on their A-game in the show, and I truly do think everyone did a fantastic job here. But now I really want to get to the directing and the writing, because this is where I think some people are going to be a bit split in the middle with this show, because the directing in this show, it's not like a normal show. In fact, I can't really categorize what this show really is, and that's not really a problem, because Maniac is really an amalgamation of a bunch of different things. It's a very dark comedy, but it also seems to be very absurd, but it's also a psychological thriller at points. It's also a character study, and between all the various fantasy sequences, it also at points is a mobster, you know, a mobster film. Sometimes it is a fantasy film. I mean, it's all kinds of different things, and all of them do work very well. This show can be a lot of fun at times, and there were a lot of points where I was laughing a lot, but it's also highly insightful. It's a very good look into, like I said, two very damaged people and how they do try to repair themselves, and I did think they did a very good job really maintaining both of those tones here. Again, the show is very out there, and for some, that could very much take them out of it, but I really appreciate just how weird and out there the show really was, because again, it's operating on an entirely different level than pretty much anything else that's on TV right now, and that's something I really loved about the show. It doesn't really have that much of a status quo, and I think that's what makes it so unique and different, and that's one of the things I really do love about Maniac overall. In terms of the writing, though, the show is also very strong, because one of the things I really loved about the show is how long it actually takes to get to the initial plot. The first two episodes are actually just getting us into the characters of Owen and Annie, and you really do feel attached to these two. You really do understand both of their characters. You like where they're coming from. Annie especially is a very well-written character, and I really did love where they ended up going with these two. You know, there's a lot of similarities that they have, and you can see why these two would enter this drug test and why they would want to help themselves, how it's really going to benefit them, and, you know, seeing their transgressions that they're really dealing with, I really did love seeing here, particularly when it comes to the character of Annie. Like I said, this is a character whose sister has in fact died, and that has very much taken over her entire life. It's something that has very much consumed her. She really has not been able to get over it. You can tell that she feels a lot of guilt for what's happening, and you know, throughout the show she frequently does go back to her sister, and this is a very strong story for her. I really love where they end up going with Annie, because this is kind of made her closed off from society. She lashes out at various people, and you can see that this is obviously her inner guilt and her inner, you know, her inability to really save, you know, her sister. And when you eventually find out how her sister died, it makes it all the more tragic. And I really loved where they were able to go with Annie as a character, because there is a lot of stuff that they give her, and I think all of it is very well done, and I really did love what they did with her overall. But what's great about the show is that it's not just Owen and Annie that get a lot of focus. The show does a good job of really fleshing out pretty much everyone, especially James K. Mantelray, who had far more development than I could have even expected. I mean, like I said, this guy is not really together at all. He is incredibly erratic. He has so many panic attacks throughout the show. His introduction scene is both hysterical but also kind of pathetic when you really get into who his character really is, and especially when it comes to his relationship with Sally Field, because this is a relationship you can tell she very much has nurtured him and she coddles him a lot, but he also very much does resent her in that way, and I really did get into that storyline in the show as well, and I think they did a very good job with getting us into those characters. I honestly did feel just as attached to Owen and Annie as I did to James and James and the character of Azumi. I really did love both of their characters. I thought they worked very well here. And like I said, the show, it really isn't afraid to get into some really weird stuff with these characters, especially with the character of James, and I really do applaud the show for going there, for sure. But something else that Maniac does so well is really giving you a very good understanding of what it really is trying to do, because at first, yeah, the show is very weird, and for some that can be a little hard to get into. There's something very odd and different about the show, and I think the world building is very strong. The show clearly takes place in this alternate present. It's not the future, but it is in fact an alternate present, and I think they did a very good job with that here, because like I said, it is very weird, it is very out there, but when you really do think about it, the show is really a social commentary on how we often, try to do something to help ourselves and want to do what we can to imagine that all of our problems are just going to go away, when in reality, we really need to take that initiative. We really need to do something about it, and that's something that Owen and Annie really do learn throughout the course of this series, and I really did love getting into that. And again, the way that we're able to express that through all these different sequences with them is very well handled, and unlike anything else I've really seen on TV, and I really did love that overall. And sure, the show does have a lot of parallels to certain shows. The big one for sure being 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, sure, Gerda is very similar to the character of Hal, but what Gerda has that Hal doesn't is a much more tragic backstory. Gerda actually has a reason for why she is the way she is. She's given these emotions, and she is very similar to Annie in that sense, and I really did love what they ended up doing with her character, because like I said, on a surface level, she could have just been a discount version of Hal, and I really loved where they ended up going with her. It wasn't really what I was expecting, and I thought that was also very well handled here. However, for all the things that Maniac does right, there are a couple things here and there that I do think they got wrong. I will say right off the bat, the big one, of course, is the character of Owen, who, look, I do enjoy this character a lot. I think Hill does a very good job portraying him, but compared to Annie, it's just not really there. And I think it's mainly because Annie just has so many layers of character development, and she goes through a really big journey that anyone else in comparison, would definitely not be as strong. But then you look at someone like James, who I do think is just as strong as Annie, and Owen just isn't really there for me. His story is very, very simple. He has a brother, Jed, who is clearly very violent. He's someone who has been accused of sexual assault, and basically Owen is trying to figure out if he should just admit that his brother is guilty, because he absolutely is, or if he should just go along with it and, try to finally get that love and devotion that he's always wanted for his family. Because like I said, they do very much resent him. And, in theory, this does sound like a good story. It does sound like there's a lot they can do here. The problem is, they just really don't. Most of Owen's storyline involves him talking to this alternate version of his brother known as Grimsby, and I did like seeing the relationship between these two. I thought it was interesting overall. It's just the story in general never really got there for me. I never felt as attached to a story as I did to Annie's, and this is especially exacerbated when we are going back and forth between the two. When we're cutting to Owen's story and what he really went through, it just isn't as strong as Annie. And there are a lot of things that I did want to see with Owen that I just did not feel was explored as much. For example, there is this character known as Olivia, played by Grace Van Patten. This is this woman that Owen clearly did have feelings for, but it just didn't really work out between them, and I kept thinking we were going to cut back to her and maybe get some more explanation of what she's really going through, and the most we do get is this two-part episode with her, and we kind of see like what an idea of their future could have been together, but I kept wanting to see her in the present, and we just didn't, and to me, this was a missed opportunity, and again, maybe it's just because Annie's is a lot more detailed and there's a lot more going on with her story, but I just really wanted a little bit more with Owen, and for me, it just wasn't there as much as it was with Annie. Again, Hill still does a phenomenal job. I am not at all discrediting his role, and I did enjoy Owen's character. I don't want you to think I didn't. It's just, I needed a little bit more depth with him, and it just wasn't there for me. Also, I will admit, the fantasy sequences at first, I was not a fan of. The first one in particular is honestly quite boring. It really was easy to get taken out of, but once the stories start to play a more major role in the overall story of what's going on, that's when I really started to get more into it. I honestly do think it does get better as it goes on. For some, it might be a lot to take in at first. Oh, they're playing different, they're playing different characters every episode, and sure, it is jarring. Again, I'm not going to lie to you. It is definitely jarring. The whole fourth episode is one long fantasy sequence, but eventually, like I said, this does start to intertwine with the main event of what's actually going on, and I do think they did a very good job with that here. Particularly the last few fantasy sequences are extremely strong, and I really loved where they end up going with it. I think it honestly did get more interesting as it went on, and I think that's one of the things the show really does do best is, sure, like I said, it is a show that is operating on a different level than most shows, but eventually it is able to normalize itself a bit, and it is able to give you a bigger idea of the story, and, the more comfortable you really do become with the show, I think the better the show really does get, and that's something I really did love about it overall. In terms of visuals, this show is phenomenal. This is easily one of the most visually stunning shows I have seen all year. There are so many shots in the show that are going to stay embedded in my memory forever. There's just so many shots I can think of. And especially, again, when it comes to the various genres that we're tackling with here, they all do look different. And some of them have different aspect ratios. The costumes look different. Some of them are period pieces. And we do go through a bunch of different timelines. There's an episode in the 80s. There's an episode in like the 40s. There's one in the 60s. I mean, they really don't shy away from that stuff. And that's something I love. The show really does go all out with it. And it really is kind of a show for everyone in that sense, and they do a very good job with that. Especially one scene in the penultimate episodes, this one-take hallway scene, it's outstanding. I love the way they were able to do it. It's something that looks very hard to pull off, but I am very happy they were able to do it as much as they, as well as they did, and I really did love it overall. It's definitely one of the most impressive sequences within this entire show. There's a lot of great sequences with that, but just the detail of the world in general. Like I said, the world building here is very strong. This is a world in which advertising is pretty much the backdrop of this entire world. Constantly characters are, getting thrown ads at, they're constantly being advertised to, and they're constantly being asked to, buy this thing or do this thing, and that is something that we can definitely relate to in this world, but the show in general is kind of satirization of that, how we're constantly being, we're constantly being advertised to, and we're constantly being thrown all of these various, promotions and subscription services and things like that. And a lot of the time, we do it out of guilt. We don't necessarily do it because we want to, but we do it out of guilt. And I do think that's something that the show handled very well. I really love the world building here. Just the detail of the, just the detail of the room in which all the patients are being kept for the drug test is so great. Just again, just the details in the background are so strong here, and that's something that I absolutely loved about the show, and one of the strongest things about it by far. The score as well is so good. It is very dreamy. It's very, there's a lot of like synthesizers and things like that, and I really loved the score a lot here. It's very entrancing, and again, perfectly puts you into that world that the show really is trying to be in. And the editing, I will admit, some of the show is a little bit slow, especially when it comes to the first few episodes. The first episode in particular, for some, they're not really going to like it. And in fact, I don't think you can judge the show from the first episode. It's similar to Forever, where the plot really doesn't kick in until the third episode. The first two episodes you can honestly see as like an extended prologue. And I know for some they're like, oh, why isn't the show just 8 episodes? But you guys have to remember, this was initially supposed to be a movie, and they stretched it out to a TV series, and from what I've seen, you know, from what the final product ended up being, I think that was definitely the right choice. I think definitely it was a smart idea to make it a full-length TV series rather than a movie. We were able to flesh out these characters a lot more, and that's something that I really did love about it a lot. It's a very well-paced show, especially once you get to the back half of the show, which I do think is just a little bit stronger than the first half. And not that the first half isn't strong, but I do think that once we initially get into the vibe of what's really going on, and we start to see, you know, how these fantasies and all these various, you know, drugs that Annie and Owen are taking, the effect that it starts to have on them, that's really when I think the show is working at its best. And I think, again, that was very much demonstrated through the pacing, which I think got increasingly better within each episode. That being said, the way the show does wrap up, while I do think is very strong, just confused me a bit. I couldn't really tell where they were going with the ending. And again, that's not necessarily a problem. It's just one of those things where I really do need to think about, because again, the show does have a definitive conclusion. This is absolutely the only season, and thank God for that. I do not want a season 2. The way things wrap up is very good. It's just the way things were ending, I'm just a little confused about what the ending is actually saying. They seem to suggest one thing, and then the ending happens, and it kind of suggests something else, and I just couldn't really tell what they were really trying to say here. Because again, the show does have a lot of things to say about our inner pain and how we really try to, you know, we really do try to ignore it, and eventually we do try to get help about, you know, we do try to get help from it. But the way this series does conclude, I just don't really know what it was really trying to say. It's definitely a solid ending. It's just I'm a little bit confused by just some of the end shots here and there with what they were really trying to do. Other than that, I thought this was a very good finale. I really love where they were able to go with the show. And again, it does reach a very satisfying conclusion. It's just the way things did wrap up, I just was a little bit perplexed as to what they were really trying to say. But overall, guys, Maniac is probably one of the most ambitious things I think Netflix has ever put out. It's very hard to classify. It's very different from most TV shows out there, for sure. It has some really strong performances from Jonah Hill, Justin Theroux, and Emma Stone. Stone and Theroux especially should be nominated at the Emmys next year, for sure. It tells a very complex story that honestly is very hard to put into words. There's a lot of things I'd love to say about it, but it really is one of those shows you just kind of need to go out and experience for yourself, regardless if you like it or not. I really do think this is a must-watch for all. It's definitely a really great show for Netflix, and while it didn't give me everything I wanted, it still told a very solid story, and at the end of the day, really did impress me, just with its visuals, because, again, that does bring a lot to the table. The visual style is incredible, but also with its story, which does a very good job of getting into the head of two very damaged people, and how they really do process grief and everything that they're going through, and I think that was definitely very well handled overall. Maniac is definitely a very solid show overall, and I am going to give Maniac overall a B+. But overall, guys, in my review of Maniac overall, let me know what you guys thought of the series overall. Love your thoughts, and it will see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.